Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas, and what would you say if I told you the PlayStation 6 is coming out in 2026? You'd say, no, don't be silly, we all know it's going to be 2028. Well, no, actually, we don't all know it's going to be 2028, but it could be. It might be 2027, it might be 2029, but I want to float the idea of having a PlayStation 6 in 2026, 2 years from now. It's feasible, it's plausible, it could happen. It just depends how far Sony are into the development of this console. So let's break it down and have a look at PlayStation's in honour of the 30th anniversary. Now, the original PlayStation came out 30 years ago, obviously. The PlayStation 2 then came out roughly about 7 years after that, depending on what region you are in. If we look at the PS3, that's a bit different. That came out roughly 5 to 6 years after the PS2. But the PS3 generation was quite long because it took another 7 to 8 years before the PS4 came out. And then the PS4 came out 2013, as we all know. The PS5 came out 7 years later. Now, what I want to float with this idea is the concept of having a PS2 to the PS3. And that took 6 to 7 years. So if we look at the PS5, 6 to 7 years later, where does that place us? Well, it places possibly at the end of 2026. Do you see where I'm going with this? No, you don't. Not at all. Look, Sony tries to keep up at least 6 to 8 years for every console. Some generations do seem longer than others. Let's face it, the PS4 generation seemed huge. It seemed to take ages, but in actual fact, it didn't. The PS3 generation seemed to take ages, but in actual fact, it didn't. Some people didn't get a PS3 until 2007. And then in 2013, there you go, you've got the PS4. So if you look at the cycle of this, I think it's feasible to say that the PS6 will come out in 2026. We may even hear about it in 18 months' time, which is absolutely insane to think about. At this point, people have got the idea that PlayStation 6 is going to come out in 2028 as, a give or take a year, which still seems a little late for what I think. I think we will genuinely see it in 2026. Why? Well, you think about it realistically. Technology evolves faster these days. Just look how quick that they can slim down things. Okay, look, yeah, I know. The PS5 Pro isn't exactly smaller than the Slim, for example. However, it's still roughly the same size as the original PlayStation 5. In fact, it is a little bit smaller. I've measured it, it is a little bit smaller. And the technology that's in the PS5 Pro is clearly better than the original PS5. So if you had the technology in the original PS5, in today's kind of hardware design and everything, it would be even smaller than what the Slim is. So technology gets better and smaller as time goes on. So it's only feasible to say that in 2 years' time, whatever Sony is working on now will be much more powerful than even the PS5 Pro. Microsoft is a whole different story. We're not going to talk about Microsoft because, look, let's face it, they're probably going out of the console business. They're probably just going to end up being a publisher to some degree. I mean, if it works for them, it works for them, fine, whatever. But that is something I'll discuss in another video. Anyway, if you think the PS5 is a good console, then sure, you might get the PS5 Pro. But if you get the PS5 Pro, what's the point in you getting a PS6? Well, to be honest, the PS5 Pro sold a lot better than what people thought. And I can understand why. Yes, I know it's got issues with how some games can look. They look worse than the original PS5, but that's irrelevant. That can be sorted. That's, whatever. But in 2 years' time, the technology then is going to be better than what it is when the PS5 Pro was developed. And the PS5 Pro was developed roughly 18 to 24 months ago. It's been building up since then. So the technology in the PS5 Pro is technically out of date already. So what does that mean for Sony? Well, the quicker they get the PlayStation 6 out and get past all of this and publish as the most powerful, best, awesome console ever, that's going to work for them. That's a really good marketing tactic because the whole Microsoft thing and nobody being sure if they are going to really release another console. I mean, look, my opinion, they probably will. They probably will. But if Sony can jump the gun here and say we've got the most powerful console at least a year, 18 months before the next Xbox, that is going to sell. And I did a video recently with the PS6 being backwards compatible with everything, like literally PS1 to PS5 games. If they did that, that would be a seller. So put all this together. An earlier release of PlayStation 6, more powerful than any other console on the market, 12 to 18 months ahead of the competition, can play every PlayStation disc game that exists. It's a no-brainer. That stuff is going to sell. Even at $700, that is going to sell. Throw a disc drive in there as well. Make sure, in fact, you're going to have to throw a disc drive in there if you want to play the old disc games. But that will sell. In fact, if Sony do that, I am instantly buying a PS6 and getting rid of every other PlayStation I have. Because it means that ultimately there's no point in owning a PlayStation. Just the 6. And realistically, Sony doesn't make any money selling a PS3. Sony doesn't make any money selling a PS2. But people still want to play PS2 games and PS3 games. Well, sell them a PS6 that plays them. Sony's going to get all that money. And it only makes sense if they do it sooner rather than later. So 2026 makes perfect sense. Just absolute perfect sense. And if they have any sense at all, they'll release it on December 3rd, 2026. Why? Because that's very clever. And if you can understand why that's very clever, please tell me in the comments below right now why you think it's very clever. I'll give you a second and then I'll explain it. Okay, the reason why it's very clever is it's 32 years after the original, and the original was 32-bit. I think that's kind of cool. I think that's really good. That's really clever. And they could market that because people think, oh, wow, that is some really good marketing. That's awesome. It's marketing tactics, and I think that's a really, really good idea to release it 32 years after the original 32-bit console so they could still ride the train of 30th anniversary. Anyway, what do you think about the PS6? Are we destined to get it 2026, or do you think we'll get it 2027, 28, 29, or even 2030? I can't see us getting 2030. That's a bit too far. 10 years between. Nah. But for me, I firmly believe 2026 because it makes the most sense. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one.